Welcome to Talk Tantra to me. Today I have two of my gorgeous, magical, creative, inspiring sisters here, and we're going to be talking about a subject that is, taboo, but shouldn't be. It's really women's rights, it's body autonomy, and it's abortion as well. And this is not something that I've experienced personally as like a body experience, but it's definitely something that I've grappled with, being a woman, having, pregnancy scares, and I'm really looking forward to bringing these stories to light and showing a different perspective on this, because I knew I grew up in a very conservative town where there's literally nothing less spiritual in that perspective from, small town Missouri. There's nothing less spiritual than getting an abortion. And it was super shamed. I remember growing up in a home where my mother specifically voted around this one issue and voted, very Republican and against abortion. And when I first started having sex, and the very first time I had sex, my period was 2 weeks late, so I was terrified. Thankfully, I wasn't put in a position where I had to make that decision, but it's definitely something that I feel very close to as well for different reasons. And I've spoken with Grace about this a bit, and she's the first person that I think that I really saw this as abortion as a spiritual experience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I have Grace and Rowan here. Rowan, if you'd like to start just telling us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Rowan Katz. I use they, them, or they, fair pronouns. And I am a genderless fairy, a musician, a mystic. I'm a Jew raised between Reform Judaism and eclectic witchcraft. My mom is a practicing witch, and I've been practicing since I was very young. I started reading cards when I was about 10. I'm an herbalist and a poet, and thank you so much for having me here today, Leola, and I'm so grateful to be here with my beautiful friend Grace that was actually present for part of the story that I'm going to tell, which I'm really grateful for. And I think this is a really, really important topic, and I honestly couldn't pick two better people to be in the room with to talk about this today, so thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And Grace, would you like to?
Yeah, I am Grace McGrade. I am a practicing witch and astrologer. And I've had a spiritual abortion.
Beautiful. Cool. I also wanted to bring up the fact that I didn't know that today was the Women's March for body rights. Did you guys realize that?
No.
There's people marching downtown, and all over, and I had no idea.
What?
And we just happened to schedule this today.
Well, there's also something really interesting happening astrologically, which is Eris, which is a lesser known asteroid, which I call it the shit stirring dwarf planet of female resentment, is squaring Pluto, which is the soul's evolution, the collective soul's evolution, in the next 2 weeks. And the last time these two planetary bodies interacted was during the Me Too movement, and also during the Women's March. So these conversations, I think, are going to, become more and more commonplace and pertinent. They're very important dialogues.
I feel like my body's been in constant chills since we started speaking, but
Yeah.
Excited to go deeper on this. So, Rowan, why don't you start by sharing a little bit about your story with, abortion and this experience?
So I've had 2 abortions. That was something that I was really ashamed of for a long time. I used to tell people that I had only had one, and I don't give a shit now. There's so many people who have had more than one abortion. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that either. My first abortion was when I was 18. My second one was when I was 21. I was in active addiction to alcohol and other substances. And I think a lot of that was also spurred on by the trauma of abortion and not having any idea how to deal with that. I'm sorry, my second one was when I was 20, not 21. But The first abortion I had an ongoing relationship with someone for most of the time I was a teenager, and it was one of those crazy relationships where like you can't be in the same room as someone. Mm-hmm. Like you could leave us alone in a kitchen for 2 minutes and we'd be like on the floor.
I recall.
Yeah. And yeah, Grace was there. We've known each other since we were like 14 or 15. And in a weird way, I think it was sort of inevitable that it happened. I think with certain people, it's like my body knew that at a certain point in time, this person was going to get me pregnant. And I don't know the science behind that, but there was really high chemistry there on so many levels. And it was devastating, honestly, because I really loved this person, and I still do as a friend. And I was very confused. I had just moved to New York, and Grace was one of the only people that I knew and felt safe and close enough at the time to tell what was going on. It was a brutal experience, though, and I didn't tell the person who got me pregnant for months afterwards for fear of how they would react and just the shame. And I have to say that I was raised in a really sex positive household. My mom has terminated pregnancies. My grandmother terminated a pregnancy. So I come from a line of women who have been really gung-ho about exercising their rights. My paternal grandmother was one of the first women to practice criminal law in the state of California, so he was brought up in an extremely progressive feminist household, even in the 50s and 60s. And he was surrounded by queer people, people of color, women who were being criminalized by the system. And even with all of that, the amount of shame that I felt in that experience was really intense. I thought that the worst thing I could possibly do was get pregnant. I literally thought, like, I had reoccurring thoughts as a teenager, like, well, I'm a huge fuck up and I can't do anything right, but at least I haven't gotten pregnant. And then I got pregnant and I thought, that's it. It's the end of the world. I'm a worthless piece of shit, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, this is coming from an 18-year-old with issues, to say the least. That year was a really hard year. I experienced a lot of loss and grief outside of that abortion that year. I had a dream right around the time that I found out I was pregnant. And I dreamt about what my life would have been if I had carried out the pregnancy. And I saw my daughter, and she was so gorgeous. And I named her Violet, which became the name of my first album later on. And I saw myself, you know, 20, 30 years into the future, like I dreamt a whole life. And I loved my daughter so much in that dream, but I didn't like a lot of things about the life that I led in that dream. And I firmly believe, I mean, there are so many reasons why I believe that those experiences came to me. I feel like there's so much that I still haven't worked out on a spiritual level about those experiences. There's so much that I still don't know regarding my ontology about what constitutes life, or I believe I'm a bit of an animist, so I do believe that everything is imbued with life and with spirit. And I believe that everything that has happened to me is sort of a divine experience, but it didn't feel like it at the time. And that's because I was also extremely removed from myself and from my spirit from my practice at that time in my life. And the trauma resulting from how I rather didn't navigate that experience led me to some really dark places. I'm not gonna lie about that. That trauma led me to some pretty self-destructive behaviors. And now I can look back at that kid, because I really was a kid. When you're 18, you're still a kid in a lot of ways, and just hold so much love for that person, and see that a huge part of this experience and what makes it spiritual for me is releasing shame. Because I don't feel shame about those experiences anymore, and I thought that I would forever. I thought I would spend the rest of my life feeling guilty about them, and I don't anymore at all. In fact, I feel so empowered by making those choices for myself and for my partners who are pursuing, their lives and their livelihoods and their creative projects in their own ways, and already dealing with enough as young people in this society. And I don't think that any of us should feel ashamed about that whatsoever at all. So I have completely released myself from that. I can talk a bit more about my second experience with abortion, which was really different and far more spiritual, if that's okay.
Yeah, please continue.
So when I was 20, 2 years later, I had my first abortion. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I moved to New York. And I had my second one a month before I left. And it was just this really sort of fucked up. I was like, are you serious? And I had just gotten to the point of working through a lot of the worst of the first one over the period of 2 years. And shouts out to Planned Parenthood. They performed both of my abortions, and they were both medicated abortions where I took 2 pills at home. And I'm so grateful to the friends that held me through that experience both times. And I can go into some detail about that later also, because I think a lot of people wonder what medicated abortion is like. But my partner at the time that I had my second abortion, we hadn't been together for very long, but they were and are a really, really gifted healer and herbalist and practicing witch and mystic. And I don't want to say too much about them to not give away their anonymity and respect them, but yeah. I will say they come from several traditions of really, really powerful magic and wisdom and mysticism. They were so fucking supportive, and before we tried a medicated abortion, we actually pursued the route of an herbal one, as both of us were herbalists. And that didn't work, and I do want to put a huge disclaimer on herbal abortion and using emmenagogues to induce a miscarriage or terminate a pregnancy. It can be really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that they actually do work, and you have to catch it very early on in order for it to work. And if anybody who's watching this or listening to this has questions about my experience with that, I really encourage you to hit me up or ask a medical professional about that. Ask a professional herbalist about it. They will tell you much the same of what I'm telling you.
Also, just want to cut in, there is an episode of this podcast, I don't have the exact number here, but it's with Paige. It's something along the lines of an herbal or holistic perspective of sex. So she does talk about kind of what that process looks like to do like a naturopathic abortion or inducing your period. She also highly recommends getting a professional, especially if it's beyond the inducing your period portion of the show. So definitely take a look at that if you are interested in, trying that route, and also definitely enlist a professional. But
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
For sure, yeah, and that's great. I'm so glad that we also have material from this awesome podcast for people to go to. But we tried that, and it didn't work, and both times I found out I was pregnant, I believe I was already 4 weeks in. So that's pretty common. Most people don't actually realize that they're pregnant until they have missed a period, and by that point it is already 4 weeks in, 5 weeks in, 6 weeks in. So policies that mandate that you get an abortion before 6 weeks are complete and total bullshit. But so yeah, basically what happened is my partner, bless them, oh my God, was so amazing during that process. They took such incredible care of me, and they were actually the one that suggested that we do a ceremony to help the spirit of that being move on. And I want to also say something, which is that I don't believe that life begins at conception necessarily, because I believe that we are all inherently imbued with life at any point in our process. But I do believe that that was a really important part of our grieving process, because at the end of the day, I loved the people that I had these experiences with very much, and that's not the case for everyone by a long shot. But I did love those people very much, and I was grieving a life that we could have had together. I was grieving a family that we could have had together, and I was also grieving the fact that I never ever wanted kids before experiencing those pregnancies. And I don't know what happened to me on a biological level, the hormones that got released in me, the experiences that I had, but I also wonder if part of my journey with having those pregnancies was to actually lead me to a place where I wanted children. And how much that's going to affect my life from here on out, because I still do really want children. And that's really special too, and I do believe that those spirits will come back to me when it's time for them to actually be brought into this world as human beings. Unless I give birth to puppies, which is like also totally fine with me. But yeah, so we held sacred space, we made ritual, and we chanted, and we cried, and we said what we needed to say to the being that may have been invited in too soon in our lives. And I suffered so much less guilt and shame and grief, you know, really having my partner be present with me during that, having my friends be really present with me, whereas the first one, my friends were present with me, but I kept a lot of my experience to myself, and I really shoved it down and did all the really healthy things, you know, but I will be forever grateful to that person for the way that they carried us through that experience. And it's really made me so much more aware of what is possible regarding how we greet abortion. I also am really just so grateful for the work that abortion doulas do.
Yeah, what is that?
I've never heard of that.
So we have this idea, and I'm sure that there are more kinds of doulas that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
But I know mostly about birth doulas, death doulas, and there's also abortion doulas. I think that there's also postpartum doulas, if I'm not mistaken. But so an abortion doula is actually someone that's certified and has been educated in how to guide people that have experienced pregnancy termination or miscarriage through the process. And I think that that is like such incredible work. And I would really love to be able to do that one day, actually. And I'm also so grateful that I've had these experiences, because what if I have a kid one day and they decide to have an abortion? You know, I can only imagine that at some point in my life, another one of my friends is going to have an abortion. And I want to know how to show up for them and be present for that and take shame away from the experience and hold them and do whatever they need in that capacity. So yeah, I think that that's, you know, the bulk of my experience, you know, without giving too much detail. But
Yeah.
I also wanted to add that I often think about the fact that if I hadn't been able to have those terminations, that I would have 2 children right now. And not that it matters, because the only reason that you should ever need to terminate a pregnancy is that you don't want to be pregnant and that you don't want to give birth, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But I think about the fact that both of those pregnancies happened before I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was really young, I'm 25 and I'm like so full of love and have healed so much, but I'm also 25 and like still getting my shit together in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do bring kids into this world, I want to be the absolute best parent that I can possibly be for them. And that is also a spiritual experience in a really profound way. Like there's so many mother wounds in me from like my own maternal lineages that I'm gonna spend a lot more time working through before I feel like I can really parent a child without repeating a lot of those cycles.
Yeah. I have one question. If you feel comfortable, would you mind sharing a little bit more about what the ritual or the ceremony was like in the way that you honored that spirit or that loss?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it was a traumatic experience still, just due to the amount of like grief that I was feeling. So I don't remember it super clearly. But, and also I want to add that the lineages that my partner at the time come from, I believe that several of them are closed practices. So I was really sort of giving them the reins there. But we did incorporate chanting, and I think that the chanting was really important. But the thing that I found to be most important was actually like just feeling so much love. Like we centered so much love, like our love for each other, our love for whatever that being would have been. And speaking to it and telling them that it's okay for you to go right now. We love you so much, but it's not the right time right now. And you're invited to come back, to either of us, together, apart, at some point when it's right for you. And we centered so much love through that experience that I feel like love is the undoing of shame. It's the balm to shame. And I think sometimes shame can also be an expression of love too, but it depends on the circumstance, And, but yeah, I just remember, in my experience, and there are certain books that I've read that talk a lot about this. I can't remember the one that I just was reading recently for the life of me, but we have so many experiences that are societally shamed already and so frowned upon that knowing how to grieve those experiences with love is almost completely unavailable to a great deal of us. And I think one of the most radical and meaningful things that has been done for me in my life is being given the space to grieve experiences that I was told I should never even speak about.
Yeah.
So that's what that ritual really did. It was a grief ritual. It was ceremonial, and yeah, God, I'm so glad that we did that when we did. And I also want to say that, like, to have someone step up into a role of actually, like, carrying that space and, like that person is a beautiful queer being like myself, but also like I really felt like they were holding what one might refer to as a masculine polarity in that situation, because I needed someone to be my container, and I needed someone to create a space during a time when I was just I was like completely just like, I can't do structure, I can't hold myself here or really hold you. And God, that was so healing as well. And I think that no matter what kind of relationship you're in, whether it be queer as fuck or super like hetero traditional, whatever's going on there, whatever roles you're embracing, sometimes one person needs to step up and take on a certain polarity. And I'm just really, really grateful for the fact that that person held that space for me at that time.
It's incredible. Cheers to the compassionate, evolved masculine.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, as Rowan had said, like this queer partner stepped into that role, but I feel like you can ask your community to take that role. Like you can ask, your friends, whether they're, however they identify. So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was so special. Yeah. Grace, would you like to share your story?
Yes, absolutely. My story begins in Scotland. I had freshly moved to Findhorn, which is a spiritual community. I did not know many people there, but I did, in fact, fall in love. I met this beautiful South African guy, and within 2 weeks, we were living together. And it was very magnetic. It was very dynamic. It was also... That's him now. Just kidding.
I think that's my CFA box. Yeah. Everyone, that's my group. It's fine.
And it was like kind of, what they say about those like twin flame relationships where like everything is brought out really, really quickly. Like he was supposed to go back to South Africa and he didn't. And instead he kind of like immediately moved in with me. And it was like we were under each other's spell. It was just like complete sex all the time. And we weren't trying. It was not like we were trying to get pregnant, but we weren't not trying to get pregnant. And what's interesting is I think I even remember the exact moment of conception, because I remember having such like powerful, this is my first experience of tantric sex, because it was like we're on this like high vibrational part of the land. My like heart was so open, and I think I even recall being like, something that is not us has entered the space. Something has entered the chat, so to speak. And this was, I think, when said conception happened. And when I found out, because I missed my period, my immediate emotion was not one of fear. It was actually one of love and joy. And then it kind of quickly changed because of the practicality. He didn't have a job. At first, I think we like toyed with the idea of moving to South Africa. And, with these experiences, sometimes you build this like imaginary timeline in your head. And it can be kind of like suddenly there's this like timeline that's extending out in front of you, and it's daunting and it's really intense. And we were already kind of having relational issues. And because I was new to this part of the world and this land, like I had just sort of entered this existing community. And as a result, what happened was I was kind of forced to be very vulnerable with people. I luckily had 2 friends there who had had similar experiences. But I remember the most daunting thing was like, I don't know what I'm going to tell my dad. I was like, what am I going to say to him? Like, I don't know what to do. And luckily both my parents were like, look, this is your choice. I'm very lucky to have incredible parents. But I knew that whatever was happening, I was having a spiritual experience. I knew, and I felt differently when I was pregnant. Like something energetically shifted, and it probably hormonally shifted. Mm-hmm. And it felt like whatever that was an initiation, an important initiation of some kind. Mm-hmm. Whether or not I needed to sort of meld with this person's DNA momentarily, or there was some kind of, it was like I was given like an extra boon of sort of super mama strength all of a sudden, and this sense of like, okay, what am I gonna do? So I called my dad, and I really took time to think about this. Like I really sat with this decision for a while. And my dad was like, listen, I can refer you to my Kabbalah teacher, who has an interesting story about sort of pregnancy and abortion. And I wanted to sort of talk to a lot of people before I made an ultimate decision, even though, once again, the practicality of us having a child was sort of basically impossible, because capitalism. And so I called this guy, his name's John Oakley, and he told me this story. And he told me that when he was 19, him and his girlfriend got pregnant. And they had to get an abortion. And they agreed to never talk about it again. And they stayed together for sort of 4 years after that, just purely in a sort of trauma bond, because they were both felt so guilty and ashamed. And when John Oakley, 4 years later, when he was having a sort of spiritual awakening, he was somewhere in London at some event, and this man came up to him and he was like, listen, I'm a psychic. And John Oakley's uncle had just passed away, and he was like, I see your uncle. And he was describing him. He was like, there's this scent of tobacco. His uncle, like, obviously smoked tobacco out of a pipe. And he's like describing him perfectly. And he's like, and I also see this 4-year-old girl. And she wants you to know that she can't come back unless you forgive yourself. And so he got out of the relationship. He worked on forgiving himself. Years later, he finds a new girlfriend. She gets pregnant. And they're walking, I think, by the River Thames, and they pass the building in which John Oakley's old girlfriend got her abortion. And his new girlfriend is pregnant, and he points out the building, and then the baby starts kicking. Like it was potentially the same soul that was sort of making itself known. And I really believe that some souls maybe come here for just like not even a full physical experience. Mm-hmm. My mom shared a story with me where she had a miscarriage before I was born, and she had sort of put her hands on her stomach and been like, now is not a good time. And then she miscarried, and then, I was the next child. So I believe that I also had like a temporary experience and then came back. So upon hearing that story, that was what I needed to sort of hear, and it's what I needed to know in order for me to adequately make a decision. And my partner, who did not deal with it in an ideal way, he was very in the sort of mind of like, no, we just can't do this. And it was very heartbreaking because I was also sort of grieving that relationship at the same time. But he luckily waited with me. And in Scotland, there's free healthcare. And I went, and I was went into hospital. I was administered 2 pills. One was taken orally, one was not. And it was incredibly painful and scary. And luckily he was there, and he sat with me. And afterwards they were like, we usually cremate the remains. And when I say remains, like, it's like a clot that was like tiny, tiny, tiny. Yeah. And they were like, what do you want us to do with it? And I was like, I want it. And they were like, okay, like, you fucking weirdo. And I was like, yeah, I want it. So what was interesting about this part of land, it was in Forres, and Forres is this small town in Scotland, and there had been a lot of witch hunts there. And so there's this like beautiful forest called Cluny Woods, and I would go there and I would walk every day. Another thing I kind of want to also mention is historically, like, witches were people who would administer abortions, which is interesting. Like, you would go see like a witch in the corner, of the forest, and they would give you some concoction. So I took the remains and I buried it in these woods, and I lit a candle and I wrote a poem about it, and I read the poem, and the poem was an homage to the timeline that I had built in my head, where I knew that this was it would have been a little girl. I knew, if it had been possible, what that life or that path would have looked like. And I really wanted in some way to get intimate with the experience. I did not want to run away from the experience. I wanted, just to have love for that. And it was really powerful. And I do believe that it happened for a reason. I do believe that I was changed permanently. I think that my confidence changed. I don't think that the mama, whatever the boon of mama energy ever left me after that. Wow. I really felt, and I also knew that I wanted to have children from that experience. I really knew, and it fostered intimacy with everybody in that community. And it really bonded me very deeply to people in a way that I don't think I had ever been vulnerable with people like that before. And insofar as sort of the way that my then partner handled it, it was, disappointing, but had he, I would never have known who he really was unless I saw who he really was, and thank God, because nope. And, I mean, the other thing that it also did was it really changed my relationship to my dad, who I had so much resentment and rage towards, and the way that he showed up for me emotionally, and how sort of carefully and kindly he navigated that will forever, be, it was one of my proudest moments to see how sort of, he was in his masculinity. He was like, what do you need? How can we help you? And
Thank you for sharing that. I definitely resonate with the part of your story where you shared that it showed you who this person was, and like what a gift to know that so early. And I know in my pregnancy scares, and there's been a few, every single time it really brought to light, like, if I know that in this moment that I don't want to have their child based on the way they're acting, then like, why am I wasting my time with this person? And then at the same time, I thought, like, what if I were to have a child right now, like, how would I support that child? And like, what would I be doing differently? And to me, it was like I'm thinking about one time specifically, and I was working for some like company that I didn't really like, and I was like, well, I would definitely quit, and I would definitely start my own business. And like, I realized, like, if I would do that just to support my child, why don't I do that to my own inner child? Like, why don't I do that for myself? And so that was a bit, and I quit that job and I started doing my own thing, and it was super transformative, seeing these experiences as like medicine. And I would love to kind of get your guys' experience with that aspect of it. Like, how did you move from the shame and guilt and fear projected on you by society, by peers, whatever, into something more, transformative or expansive?
I mean, I think for me, I really leaned into the fact that there was a higher intelligence at play. Like, that's what I needed to move through the guilt and sort of the shame. There's a higher intelligence at play, and I also think that, like, with DNA and like genetics, like who knows? Like I think I probably gained some kind of, there something needed, like it needed to happen. Like everything that ever happens needed to happen. That was how I kind of transmuted the guilt and the shame. I also, as an astrologer, can tell you that there was a lot of, placements and transits that indicated that this experience needed to happen and was very, very powerful. I remember actually going to go see my great aunt in Scotland, who is also an astrologer, and I hadn't told her, and I was still sort of sitting on the decision. And she was like, there seems to be like a transit of like a lot of motherhood themes coming up right now. Like, I was just like, okay, this is by the, there's some higher design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, my release of shame, whether it be over my abortions or in general, I think it's just like a huge ongoing process in my life. But sobriety has really, really been helpful because I've had sort of this clear lens into everything that I buried for a long time. And, as part of a 12-step program, you do a 4-step, which is a list of your resentments and your guilt and all of these things, and looking at that really clearly and, having resentments, whether they make sense or not, is like, again, I love the people that I've had these experiences with very much, but I had resentments towards them. It doesn't matter if they're logical or not, and I had a shit ton of resentment towards myself. And I think what Grace was saying regarding like forgiving yourself is so important, and being honest about what you feel resentful about. I also want to say that like talking publicly about this has been so scary and so vulnerable, but the first time I ever did it, I was at Underneath St. Mark's open mic.
Oh, fun.
And I was wasted, and it was like the middle of the night, and I just like got on the floor and just talked about my fucking abortion.
Wow.
And like I'm so grateful to that community too, just like weirdos and freaks and artists just like holding space for my like baby self to talk about that experience. And I think also a huge part of this has been very like psychosomatic for me, and going through different iterations of like somatic practice, and like there's so many different parts of my spiritual practice and all these tools that I found over the years. So like dance has been really important.
Oh yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah.
I danced.
Oh, I love that.
I danced like a lot right after. That's what I did.
And it was really, really helpful. And because, the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
Actually, on that note, I completely forgot, but that was right after that was when I decided I was going to study Reiki, because I wanted to energetically heal my body. So it was what made me become a Reiki master. After that experience, I was like, I want to learn, I want to get intimate with this part of my body. I want to learn how to sort of have love for this. It completely changed the course of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, so for some added context, I have a lot of like womb issues and trauma. Like that year of my life was really difficult. I lost a best friend to suicide. I lost my great-grandmother. I graduated high school, had an abortion, and then after the abortion, I went looking for literally anything that would reinforce the idea that I had about myself, that was very, very shame-based, and that I, all sorts of negative thoughts. And in the process, I found someone who really, really mistreated my body and really took advantage of a very vulnerable young person. And I won't get into that for the sake of people listening, but I've had chronic lower back pain located around my coccyx at the very base of my spine for 6 years, 7 years maybe since then. And I also have premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So there's a lot of trauma that I have concentrated in my body around this. And I have found working with herbs to be like really important. Like eating the right stuff is really important. Taking care of my body is such an important thing regarding like the specific traumas that my womb and my sacral and root energy centers and chakras have experienced. And that's also so ancestral for me. I don't know how many people in my lineages have had pregnancy terminations. I come from mostly an Ashkenazi Jewish lineage. And we have been all over the world trying to escape from everybody and everyone. And I can't even imagine what the people in my lineage have gone through regarding trauma around rape and assault and pregnancy. So that's just like an ongoing process. And as much as it's so difficult to be in my body on some days from the chronic pain and from my moons just being sort of awful in a lot of ways, like I embrace that, and I feel very called to the task of like working through that in this lifetime and in this body, because I believe that if enough of us do it, then maybe our children won't manifest in the same way.
Yeah. Go into the pain, baby. Gotta go into it.
Yeah.
You gotta go into it.
Yeah, I feel like we're having this conversation for generations of mothers and would-be mothers.
Yeah.
And how are you guys feeling about the current state of the world and the current way that people are perceiving this experience and making it even a criminal experience, especially in Texas, which is where they recently passed the law. Or on the 6th week, anyways, go ahead.
I think that bodily autonomy and bodily sovereignty is a human right. Blanketed. And that is that. That's as that seems to be a very prominent, important discussion that we're having. I definitely also think that it's interesting that the same people who are, I'm going to leave it there.
Simple. I love it.
Keep it simple, Sally.
Yeah, I very much so agree. And I think that, I think I might be picking up on what you're saying a little bit, and I'm going to go a step further and say that for me, bodily autonomy does not stop at my belief that people should have the right to choose when and how they get pregnant, and if they want to terminate that pregnancy or carry it to term. And I believe in bodily sovereignty for all beings and everything that we put into our bodies and do with our bodies. And I think that I want to say that rather than focus on feeding into the messages around why people feel so strongly about controlling the bodies of others, I want to focus on what we can do to teach our children and teach our peers and teach the young people in our lives and all people in our lives, regardless of age or gender, that their bodily autonomy and sovereignty matters, and to respect the bodily autonomy and sovereignty of other people. Because there's so many generations of people whose minds we're not going to change, in this lifetime. And there's a lot of people whose minds we are going to change. And I think that for me is the focus. And I find that the more that I release shame in myself, the more I can greet others and see theirs very clearly and decide how I'm going to absorb that or not, really. So I think that this fight is far from over. And I am the proud child of people who have dedicated a lot of their lives to making sure that that we are able to choose what happens to our bodies. And yeah, whatever it is that needs to be done to further education and to sort of greet this from a place of like healing and greet it for generations to come, I think is something that is so at the core of my being, because I think liberation and freedom and sovereignty is so essential to who I am. And I don't want to speak for you, Grace, but
100%, I agree with you. I also think that like it's very important to note, like as healers, we heal through our experience of the wound. You know, like you can only, like for example, my dad's an addiction counselor. You know, like he wouldn't be able to be an addiction counselor unless he was in fact an addict and had sort of gone through that. So sometimes yeah, I think that for me, like I know that I have been able to be of service to, you know, many clients who have sort of grappled with some of these decisions and how deeply personal of an experience it is. And I think that everybody should be able to make their own decision, you know?
Yeah. I definitely resonate with that, just in terms of like I wouldn't have got into the work that I'm doing now in sexuality without like being sexually assaulted, you know? So it's these traumatic experiences that can really shift things. And I love, Rowan, that you had also brought up this idea of like minds can change, and like I'm one of those minds that changed. Again, like I grew up in a place where like this was like an act of the devil. I remember telling one of my friends in middle school, like we were talking about abortion for whatever reason, and saying, well, what if Mother Mary would have aborted Jesus? Like that was my argument, which is like so perfect because I love like Mary Magdalene's like one of my greatest spirit guides. But like thinking about like the spirit is going to make its way into this world like one way or another.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love to, last little piece that I'd like to touch on before we round out this conversation is just like, how do we perceive society needs to shift, or the collective conscious needs to shift to move away from the fear and the shame and the guilt? And one of the things that I've said when people bring up abortion is that it's like a super complicated issue on so many levels that there's really no like one thing that is going to like make everyone feel at peace with this. And to me, it's like there needs to be other options for women too. Like there needs to be a space where like there isn't capitalism, there isn't patriarchy, so that there isn't the pressure to get one if you actually do want to carry. And then if you don't, then you know there's other options for that. And so I love to get your guys' perspective on that.
Well, I think like looking at the bigger picture, a lot of this, here we are, we're moving from, like part of being on earth is we're living in duality. Like that's part of the human experience. The issue around some of this is that a lot of it has been made binary and black and white, and you're this way or you're not. And I think that part of what we are all here to shift is to move out of distortions and duality and move into unity. And this change and this sort of issue of duals is, you know, being played out very dramatically. And the only way, I think, to shift it and to sort of move in an energetic way is to get rid of guilt, to get rid of shame, and to just follow your own kind of resonance. And I think that applies to this issue as well, you know, where it's not about good or bad. It's not about right or wrong. It's about emotion.
Yeah, I think something that I've thought a lot about, I mean, thanks to the teachings of a lot of other wonderful people, there's a word that's gone around a lot, and a word that one of my favorite scholars, Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of Emergent Strategy and Pleasure Activism, talks about, which is interdependence, and what becomes possible when we can actually hold space for our own beliefs and have released so much of the need to control others that we can believe what we believe and not feel like someone else has to believe the exact same thing,
Yeah.
which is just like, that's very evolved for us. And that's also shifting out of this paradigm of like,
that's what we need to do.
control and like sort of the distorted masculine polarity that has, you know, whatever, all of that stuff, which we're all indoctrinated with. We all have internalized misogyny, and we all have distorted masculinity and all of these things. But yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's so important what you're talking about for people to live in a world where it's also like, I, you know, didn't have to make the decision of staying in school and living my life or having a kid, because I think part of the shame around it is that I did want that kid. I got pregnant twice by people that I really cared about. And it was really hard for me to sort of let go of what could have been. I want to live in a world where, you know, teenagers have so many resources that if they do get pregnant and do want to carry that pregnancy to term, that they haven't already fallen into traps of substance abuse, and, you know, they're getting all of the support that they need to be able to do that, and all of this sex education that they need to make really informed choices with all the resources at their disposal, which is one of the most sort of ironic, awful parts of people advocating against the right to choose, is like none of that's being followed up, you know, with resources or education or any of these things. So it's like, all right, what's really going on there? And I also do want to say, you know, like I have an experience navigating queerness and dysphoria being a part of pregnancy. And there's so many stories about abortion, about pregnancy, that holy God, like I'm sitting with two beautiful, you know, white women, and like we've barely gotten the support that we need to navigate sexual trauma and reproductive trauma. And there are so many people that are being abused by these same systems in so many dark and terrible ways due to their identities and their otherness. And you know, trans people, people of color, people who are, you know, living in extreme poverty. And I think that that's also one of the things that we need to take a really long, hard look at as well in order to heal this stuff, are those legacies. I mean, a lot of us come from lineages that have involved rape. I think maybe most of us, most humans on this planet, which is really fucking crazy to think about.
Yeah. This issue is something that touches every other sort of issue, and in fact, like, it's the origin story. It's birth and its lack of birth, or I don't know, it's super fascinating, but I do love that we got into this space of like, let's hold space for a new earth that includes a space where there are the resources, there are the options. There's no shame around it either. There's no shame if you say, I want to carry this child to pregnancy, but then I want to, you know, to the end of term and then put it up for adoption, or I want to keep my child, or, you know, or I don't. And that's also okay. I don't, my body's not ready for that. I'm not ready for that. And to be able to have an open space where there's just like, unfortunately, like, these decisions that so many people are making are based on fear, and they have to be, like, that's just where we're at. And how can we move into a space that's more like trust for everyone? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to add on this topic?
I want to say that if people are looking to be directed towards resources, if you want to donate, you can look up organizations that are sort of moving against the Texas abortion ban online, and maybe Leola can link you.
Yeah, I'll put some in the show notes.
And there's also a really incredible spoken word poem on the topic of Mary Magdalene that feels relevant to this conversation. It's called Feral Mary, and it's by Kelly something. I don't know her last name, but I'll also send that to both of you if you want to check it out.
Feral women.
Feral
I love
women,
it.
yeah.
feral.
And that if anybody listening to this resonates with my story or wants to carry on a conversation, you can find me through Leola's stuff, which she'll probably tag Grace and I in.
I'll put in the show notes,
Same
but if
here.
you want to also put just your website or Instagram or anything right now, you're welcome to just share it.
Cool, yeah, I'm at Rowan, ROWANKATZ. My profile is private right now, but you can request to follow me or shoot me a DM.
Yeah, maybe shoot a DM and say you listen to the podcast, and then also follow her.
And I also just want to say thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for holding space.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have. This is a very safe container, and
And thank you so much, Grace,
Thank
for
you.
everything. I love you so much.
I love you too.
Grace, would you like to add anything or share where we can find you?
You can find me at Grace McGrade on Instagram. My website is palpablemagic.com. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm also very happy to kind of sit with somebody who wants to form a ritual around maybe healing from this, or answer any questions about how to sort of convert some of this emotional material into a ceremony that would sort of aid in lifting it or transmuting it or changing it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for the offering as well. And thank you so much for so vulnerably and authentically sharing these stories. It feels very light, and I feel so much love in this room right now. I feel the spirits of these babies. Beautiful. And thank you so much to the listeners. Thank you for holding space for all of us in this conversation, and even just for opening yourself up to this idea of viewing abortion as this incredible transformative experience that is, shifting in the world today. And definitely reach out to these ladies to get some more information. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta!